Even us big kids need a place to store our toys, so let's build this tool storage cabinet.
Hit it!
Efficient tool storage is going to be a challenge in any shop, and it really doesn't help that all of these tools come in their own plastic cases. Now, that's actually a good thing because it protects the tool, but if you're trying to store multiples of these, it can become pretty unruly and it takes up a lot of extra room. Because even what I consider to be the best tool cases out there, Festool Sustainers, even they can take up to 4 times the space of the tool itself. So if you have a stationary shop, it may not be the best storage solution for you. If you're on the road all the time, whole different story. All right, so I'm not saying get rid of these cases because they are valuable, lots of people love them, and if you ever want to sell the tool, you really do want that case. So hang on to them, possibly put them in storage or something, and then take the tool out and have a much denser, more compact area to store the tools, and it just doesn't take up as much room. All right, and that's what this cabinet is all about, so let me show you some of the details. The cabinet is made from 3/4 inch birch plywood with a cherry face frame and edging. There are 5 compartments, each featuring an adjustable shelf. 2 of the compartments are wide enough to handle Festool Sustainers. The top features a split lid for additional storage. Inside, you can store some of the less frequently used accessories. And if you really want to get organized, you can drop in some plastic or wood bins for hardware and screws. Now I'm going to use the Festool Domino for this project because it's quick, it's easy, and it gets me a piece of shop furniture within a day or two. Right? But if you don't have one, doesn't mean that you can't build this project. Let me show you some of the other common options. Remember, all we have to do for this project is join pieces of plywood at a right angle. So one of the great ways that you can do that is with a biscuit joiner. Now, biscuits aren't the strongest types of joints in the world, but they can get the job, especially for basic cabinetry like this. It gets the job done. So this is one option. How about dowels? Here's a nice simple doweling jig. This guy costs about $50. You can find them cheaper and you can even make your own jig. And this is what dowels look like. Very strong joinery. As long as you have a good way to index your drill bit, you're good to go. But all you need is the doweling jig, some dowels, and a drill. And I know you recognize this bad boy. It's a pocket hole jig. Right? Pocket screws are a great way for assembling joinery in a hurry. So this is definitely another viable option. So grab that tool of choice and let's make ourselves a tool cabinet. I like to cut my plywood on the floor using foam panels for support. I use a tape measure and a square to lay out my cuts as efficiently as possible. A great way to cut plywood down is to use a circular saw and a shop-made edge guide. Or you can just use a track saw. Simply line the guide up with the pencil line and begin cutting. While you can certainly take the full sheet to the table saw, I think it's much easier on the back to break the sheet down into smaller pieces first. I set aside both the back panel and the lid piece since both will be cut to fit later on. The rest of the pieces are then cross-cut to approximate size. Now I'll use the table saw to trim each piece to final width, and the Festool MFT to cross-cut them to final length. If you don't have a Festool MFT, you can get decent results using a large square and a shop-made saw guide. With all the parts cut to final size, we can now focus on the joinery. Using the domino, I cut a few mortises into each side of the fixed shelf pieces. Using the domino's built-in stops, I can achieve the same hole pattern over and over without having to mark each piece. To cut the adjoining mortises in the vertical dividers, I use the same exact stop setup. I also use a small plywood spacer to help position the domino since it's too far away from the edge to use the built-in fence. If everything was set up correctly, the shelf holes should line up perfectly. At the top of the vertical divider, I performed the same operation only using a larger spacer. This is how we end up with the top storage compartments. So here's the only catch to this method. If 2 adjacent shelves have the same exact hole pattern, the tenons will make contact during assembly. So the wider shelves will receive a slightly different hole pattern, with the same methodology applied. To make assembly easy and fast, I glue in the tenons ahead of time. Each piece is then sanded to 220 grit. Assembling something of this size can be tricky, so I'll assemble it in parts. The first section goes together easily, and clamps are added, and I check for square. The next section is added to the first once the glue is set. The other half of the unit is assembled separately using the same methodology. Now it's time to add the shelf pin holes. My favorite way to make shelf pin holes is to use this simple jig from Rockler. It comes with a plexiglass jig and a drill bit that produces perfectly spaced holes even after assembly. Since this piece is so large, I found it easiest to do the final assembly on the ground. A piece of plywood on the floor helps to provide a nice smooth assembly surface. After the glue dries, it's time to add the back panel. As constructed, the unit is already pretty strong, but with the addition of a 3/4 inch back panel, it's going to be rock solid. I flip the piece over and then take a few measurements. At the table saw, I cut the back panel to final size. I squirt a bead of glue onto the edge of each transition and then drop the back panel in place. Gravity does most of the work here, but a few clamps never hurts. While the glue dries, let's make the face frame. The parts are milled to about 3/4 of an inch in thickness and then are cut to width at the table saw. We'll once again rely on the domino joinery to attach the outside vertical pieces to the horizontal pieces. Cheap 3-way clamps are great for this kind of work, but you'll want to use something to help prevent damaging the wood, while also giving the clamps a better grip. The face frame can then be glued and nailed to the front of the case. Brad nails help hold everything in place. The remaining vertical pieces are then dropped into place and secured with glue and brad nails. Any nail holes are filled with water-based Timbermate wood filler, and then the surface is sanded thoroughly. Any slight discrepancies where the face frame meets the bottom shelf are easily sanded flush. Now for the lid, I'm going to use 2 pieces. Each piece is cut to size, and then a mitered frame is added for durability and looks. Since it's easy to use clamps here, I'll just use a few 23 gauge pins to help hold the trim into position. As you can see, the pinhole is very small. The pieces are cut to fit and then glued on one at a time. While I'm at it, I'll glue the edging onto the adjustable shelves too. Clamping those 2 at a time makes it much easier. Once the glue is dry, I sand the trim flush and add a nice round over. For the adjustable shelves, I'm using these strong bracket-style pins. These are going to be able to hold quite a bit of weight. For the finish, I'm using a simple wiping varnish. And by the way, if you're new to woodworking, you should use your shop projects to practice with new finishes and techniques. If you mess up, who cares? The whole project gets 2 coats on the inside and 3 on the outside. Once the finish dries, I can attach the lid with some no-mortise hinges. I first attach the long leaf to the underside of the lid. An easy way to do this is to flip the hinge over, push the barrel against the edge, and then pre-drill the holes. Now the holes are perfectly located and the screws can be added. And yes, I realize these steel screws look awful, but it's just shop furniture. Now to attach the hinges to the case, I'll drop the lid into position and do my best to pre-drill just one hole. With a screw added, it'll be a lot easier to pre-drill and drive the remaining screws. With the lids installed, I can now add the adjustable shelves and finally, the tools. Well, this was a long overdue upgrade for the shop, and I love having all the tools fully accessible right behind the workbench. And one thing I would suggest is with a lid like this, you really do want something there to stop it from falling down for safety. So there's hardware that you could buy for that, or you could even build just a little kickstand. Haven't done it yet, but it's on the list. Now, the hinged lid is probably going to be the thing that most folks will comment on because it might not be appropriate for everybody. Works for me. So if it doesn't work for you, if you think you're going to clutter this up all the time and it's going to get in the way, think about making drawers. Instead, you've got 5 compartments here. Break up your face frame so it doesn't take up all this space, and install some full extension slides, and you can have yourself some really nice drawers. The hinged lid works fine for me. That's what I went for. All right, so hope this inspires you to build some tool storage for your shop, even if you just take this as a starting point and a template and go in a different direction. Let me know about it. I want to see your ideas. All right, but I can't wait to get to work because now everything is right where I need it. Thanks for watching.